I finally sampled the Vermona Perfourmer Mark II and created some little sample pack out of it. And in this video I want to share with you what kind of sounds you can find in this pack and how you can use them creatively. This is something I've been wanting to do for a very long time because I absolutely love this instrument. At the same time, it's difficult to work systematically with it because usually I just get carried away when I start creating sounds with it. So it's a challenge to come up with a system of categorizing the sounds, giving some good names to them and just organizing the whole pack in a way that it's also fun for you to use it. In the end, I came up with a system of categorizing the sounds into three main categories. First, we have some section of one-shot samples, so you can find drum sounds, bass sounds, and generally warm analog type synthesizer sounds. Then you find a section with waveforms, which are mostly a little more experimental, but also some are really melodic, that you can perfectly load into a sampler and without them having any shape to them, tweak them into whatever direction you feel like. And then you also find some category with like loops, and you find both drum loops, experimental noise loops, those kinds of things, but also melodic and harmonic loops, so you can find arpeggios of some certain types of chords, as well as some random generated melodies based on some scales. I'll now speak a little more about all those individual sections, so if you're mostly interested into one of them, you can jump there directly by checking the timestamps. And otherwise, let's just start with the one-shot samples. A typical use would be to use a drum rack, like I'm using Ableton, but in any DAW you have systems of doing this. And here you can just perfectly load the samples into those slots. So if you go to the pack, for example, I can use here some industrial kick drum, and then here some hard snare drum, and maybe some kind of hi-hat. About the hi-hat sounds, I must say that generally, hi-hat and cymbal sounds are a little more difficult to make on the Perfourmer, and usually I use a lot of noise and also just experiment with FM sounds. So I didn't try to make this type of pack where you have all sorts of sounds. I really focused on having sounds that work particularly well with the Perfourmer. So here I also highly encourage you to just try using, for example, some bell sound like the direct bell and then making it very short. Just as a little tip here. But otherwise, let me just play a couple of those sounds for you with my drum pad while being loaded on a drum rack. Of course, you can also use it in a more classic way by just using one sampler, and any DAW has a sampler. So in Ableton we have a simpler, for example, and so we can just load a sample into the simpler and then play the sample on different pitches and different modes. And let me just give you a few examples of how this can sound or what kind of samples you can find for bass and synth sounds. Next, let's check out those waveforms, and here it's really important to keep some experimental mindset because I gave them some structure, so you have like bass industrial and melodic, I think. Yes. And also the raw waves. So you have some raw sawtooth, raw sine waves, square and triangle at 4 different positions. If you're into using them, if you just want to use the basic sound characteristics of the Performer, that's also possible. And here, even if it's like a bass sound, you can perfectly turn it into some higher pitched lead sound. Industrial is like some noise, weird thing. And the melodic sounds can also be turned into a bass sound. It's just for giving them a little more structure, because you see I struggle a little here in giving them proper names. So it's just like industrial 1, 2, 3. And yeah, those industrial ones are super fun to me, because here I was using often 4 oscillators with different settings of sync, FM, everything that you can do, and really going for the timbre. So sometimes it's also a bit tricky to really catch the tuning, because there are tons of overtones and resonances. But yeah, this is really great for experimentation. So if you browse through them, you get a vibe that those are more on the kind of aggressive side, but also you get some kind of smooth melodies. Or some of those very dark bass type sounds. Some surely overlap with the industrial section as well. And now with those sounds you can do whatever. So for example, I have some example here of a sound. Let's first, is it both the same? Actually, it's 2 different samples. So this is industrial 3, which usually sounds like this. And by just loading it into a sampler and basically adding some pitch envelope, which you can see here, removing the sustain, just using some good amount of decay, but kind of short. And apart from that, just driving it a little, because you can still drive those sounds, which is really fun, and add some additional distortion, we get some sort of kick drum. Or in another case, here I have Wave Industrial 31, which usually sounds like this. Basically some noise. And here I made some type of experimental snare drum out of it. And again, it's with the pitch envelope. I guess, yeah, you can see it here. Again, no sustain. Just a cool drum sound, a lot of drive actually, but it's actually fun. You can still drive them. Sometimes it's difficult with sounds that are already kind of recorded in this distorted industrial way, but here you can do it, which allows you some additional ways of having fun with those samples, which is something I really like. So here you have some sort of snare. Another typical example would be to make some pad sounds with those waveforms. So here, for example, I used Melodic 12 for making this type of pad out of it. And as you can see, I just adjusted the envelope a little, so it has some slower attack. And also, those waveforms, especially those melodic ones, resonate really well with a tiny bit of LFO, like here for basically everything except from the volume. And yeah, then you kind of just shape it into your direction, but the original sound is something super warm and analog, which I think adds some very unique flavor to sounds that you create this way. Let's now check out the third section, which is my favorite one, because this is the most musical one and the one that has the most interplay, and interplay is what the Performer is absolutely magical at. So you find lots of sequences and drum beats or noise loops and all this kind of stuff, always in 3 different tempos. So here, for example, for those harmonic loops, you see you have 70, 100 and 130. That's always like the tempos that you can find. And you can check what's the closest to your tempo, and usually it's easier to speed stuff up rather than to slow something down. For this example, let's stick to 100 BPM, and here you can also see how those clips are organized. You always have the chord type or scale type first, like augmented, diminished, Dorian, major 7, major, minor 7, Mixolydian, pentatonic, lots of stuff. And so either you understand what that means and you can use it in a systematic way, or you absolutely have no idea and just use the color you like. That's both possible here. And let's just listen to a couple of examples. And sometimes you also have some special flavor. I didn't do it for all types because it was kind of a lot of work, but for the chords I think I did it like the pizzicato ensemble, where you have like some polyphony even, and it sounds like some little string ensemble. Or something really psychedelic with a long attack that almost sounds like some pad. Now there are many creative ways of how you can use those loops. So let's for example load this one into a track, so you can just load it into some audio track and use it as it is, because it's going on for 16 bars, and after those 16 bars usually you don't really realize that it's a section of 16 bars because you can't memorize all those notes. If it's just like one bar, it sounds really repetitive like this. But again, you can do this, so you can just look for sections inside the whole clip that you like, may it be 1 bar or 2 bars or maybe something odd meter, whatever you feel like, and just use it. So you can just go hunting inside this clip for a section you like. And maybe you also like to do something in another time signature. You can do something in 7, for example, so you just have to see that there are 7 steps. And just work with it in this way. If you're into some more funky stuff, you can also add another audio track and choose another clip with the same chord type. So let's maybe use the glide saw arpeggio and have them play at the same time, so you have some even stronger interplay ensemble type vibe. Of course, that's a lot of music and you have to maybe here find like 1 bar that sounds really good, but just for giving you some ideas of how you can use them and how you can create super unique, in my opinion, textures for chords, arpeggios that sound really far from just some sequencing preset inside a synthesizer plugin. And another bonus tip for how you can use them: if you have a sampler that has a slice mode, like an Ableton the Simpler has a slice mode, you can do some super amazing stuff as well. So let's just use maybe the warm saw arpeggio. And if you use the slice mode, it kind of creates those slices based on the sensitivity. And now, based on what kind of note we play, we trigger different slices. And we can also randomize this by using some MIDI effect for random and just increasing, basically making it completely random and just increasing scale and choices a little. Then programming 1 static note. Let's choose this one. Actually, I think C1 is better because we start quite low. And then it basically rearranges your sequence, because now randomly it triggers different parts, so you kind of make some new version out of this loop, which is actually super fun. Oh, and of course you have to also add some arpeggiator. I mean, either you program individual steps here. I find it easier to use some arpeggiator. It has to come before the random plugin, and then just use, for example, 16th notes, and now we get some triggers, maybe also some octaves sometimes, and now we can see how it works. Now it's a mono kind of playback, so we don't have some polyphonic sounds, so I like to use polys, so maybe with some higher polyphony, I think the CPU can handle it. So we have a little bit of ringing after those samples have been triggered. Also sounds great with a little bit of attack. And as I mentioned, you can also find some experimental drum noise loops that are also structured in those 3 different speeds. They're all in the same folder because there's not as many as with the harmonic loops. But let me just give you a few examples of those as well. And as you can see, some of those sound really sick, but you can apply the same principles as you can with the harmonic loops. So you can also use a slice function, make your new beats, sample individual hits that then you again make your own beats with. And yeah, there are just tons of options with those clips that are incredibly fun, I hope. And this was my little introduction to the Vermona Perfourmer Sample Pack. I really hope you liked it. And if you're interested in finding out more about it, you can just click this link here or drop by at the video description first, because there's also a little discount code. Apart from that, I just wish you lots of inspiration with whatever it is that you create, maybe with some performer samples, and hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye!